Israel is burning, but Joe Biden has abandoned it to fend for itself. This isn't something new. The US president has hardly given any heed to the Jewish nation ever since he stepped into the Oval Office. However, former US President Donald Trump, being a true friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, isn't in the mood to silently ignore the matter. Hi and welcome to TFI Global, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I am your host Rohan Sachdeva, and in this video, we'll discuss why Biden should learn a lesson or two from his predecessor and help Israel in its time of need. Sitting US President Joe Biden has left Israel to fend for itself in face of a barrage of rocket attacks. But former US President Donald Trump is backing the Jewish nation with all his might. He has ripped apart the Biden administration for its obnoxious and insensitive remarks about the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. Trump said, "When I was in office, we were known as the peace presidency, because Israel's adversaries knew that the United States stood strongly with Israel and there would be swift retribution if Israel was attacked." He added, "Under Biden, the world is getting more violent and more unstable because Biden's weakness and lack of support for Israel is leading to new attacks on our allies." Trump and Israel have every reason to be angry for the Palestinian offensive into Israel. Since Tuesday, Hamas, the terror group that controls Gaza, has fired over 1,050 rockets targeting southern and central Israel, including the city of Tel Aviv. Hamas is targeting innocent Israeli civilians. The terror group fired rockets at Tel Aviv at 3 a.m. on Wednesday in a bid to target Israeli children, women, and other civilians while they were asleep. Civilians in southern and central Israel had to spend their night in shelters to protect themselves from the rockets which were being fired from Gaza. Not just rockets, Hamas is also firing anti-tank missiles into Israel. However, Israel's Iron Dome aerial defense system is intercepting and blocking Hamas attacks directed at Israeli citizens. In response to the provocations by Hamas, Israel has successfully struck many terror targets in Gaza, apart from neutralizing top Hamas leaders. But despite the repeated attacks on Israeli civilians, US President Joe Biden remains silent. Had Trump been in power, he would have never let Hamas or any other anti-Israel terror group go this far. He wouldn't have stayed quiet. In fact, the former US president would have backed Israel tacitly, apart from taming Palestine and Hamas. Even now, Trump has urged the US to stand up for Israel. He said, "America must always stand with Israel and make clear that the Palestinians must end the violence, terror, and rocket attacks, and make clear that the US will always strongly support Israel's right to defend itself." Trump has blasted Biden for his silence, but Biden has not just remained silent, but effectively abandoned Israel. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki spoke about the ongoing escalation between Israel and Palestine. Her remarks were diplomatically balanced at best and critical of Israel at worst. She said, "Biden has directed his team to engage intensively with senior Israeli and Palestinian officials as well as leaders throughout the Middle East." She added, "His team is communicating a clear and consistent message in support of de-escalation, and that is our primary focus." So de-escalation is the primary focus. If you read between the lines, taming a terror group like Hamas and reining in Palestine-based terror groups is not on the list of Biden's priorities. Biden is vouching for coexistence and peace, even if the aggressor is a terror group. But then again, why did the sitting president and like-minded men in the US not apply the same logic after the 9/11 attacks? What was the need to drag out and kill Saddam Hussein back in 2003 if de-escalation is really the primary focus of power brokers in the United States? But she didn't stop here. Consider this. Hundreds of rockets and other weapons are being fired at Israel, but the White House press secretary chose the occasion to complain about Jerusalem. She condemned the extremism that has inflicted violence upon both communities. This condemnation seems related to unrest in Jerusalem over the past few days. In fact, Psaki added, "Jerusalem, a city of such importance to people of faith around the world, must be a place of coexistence." She concluded, "It is to the officials, residents, and leaders to restore the city to a place of calm." This is victim blaming of the worst kind. A complex legal process is underway regarding Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem. But does that give a right to Hamas to bomb Israeli civilians? And does it mean that the Biden administration will draw an outrageous link between the Israeli settlements dispute and the ongoing escalations in tensions? It is Biden's compulsion to school Israel about coexistence. He has inherited Obama's legacy of advocating for a two-state solution that professes to abandon Israel and letting the situation escalate while pushing on for an independent Palestinian state. When Israel strikes back at terror groups, US liberals and other Western powers would again try to pan Israel over alleged human rights violations. With his populist and politically correct proclamations, Biden has created a vote bank for himself that blurs the line between liberalism and Islamist radicalism of the kind that Hamas practices. After coming to power, this is what Biden has done: isolated Israel and let Hamas do what it wants to do. This is also why Biden was trying to insult Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu right after coming to power. Anyway, Israel will continue defending itself against all acts of aggression, with or without the US. Ultimately, it is Biden who will be booted out from the region for backstabbing the Jewish nation.